Our special guest presenter tonight is Nancy Butler, and many of you know her from Lyric Hill Farm. Her farm is located on Hungary Road, small family-owned farm that's dedicated to sustainability, respecting people, animals, the environment, and organic practices. Lyric Hill Farm is known for their natural, handcrafted goat milk soaps. I don't know if any of you have ever seen those before, but they're wonderful. And there's other products that the farm produces as well. Nancy Butler is the heart and soul of the farm. She's got many talents, as you're going to see tonight. And making peasant bread is one of them. I've got a few etiquette reminders for you here with the program. If you can keep your audio muted during the majority of the program, that'll keep all those distracting background noises off of the presentation. And we'll be able to take your questions via the chat feature. So again, if you're not that familiar with the Zoom platform, if you just move that mouse around a little bit, things will open up and you'll see a toolbar, and there might be something called chat. And if you click on that, you can then send a message privately to me as the host, or you can send a message to everyone. And if there's a burning question, I'll try to interrupt our presenter tonight and get that to her right away so we can get it answered. If it's a question that can wait till the end, we'll save it till then. So again, you folks that are all coming in and coming on board right about now, you're all joining in for Making Peasant Bread. This is a virtual program hosted by the Granby Public Library and the Granby Agricultural Commission. My name is Holly Johnson. I'm the Program and Outreach Coordinator, and our special guest tonight is Nancy Butler from Lyric Hill Farm. Before we get started, I have a couple of plugs to make. We have two nonprofit organizations that do a tremendous job in supporting the programming at our libraries. That's Friends of Granby Public Library and Friends of Cosset Library. If you are inclined to support either of those groups, please visit the library's website or give us a call, 860-844-5275, and we will put you in touch with the Friends. They can always use volunteers, and they can always use donations. Speaking of programming, our library programming is very diverse. And I know you're all here tonight for bread making, which is a wonderful program. But I also wanted to make sure that you know that there's lots of other programs that we do. We go all across the board with things. Next Tuesday, we're hosting the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, their recycling department, as well as the town of Granby's Department of Public Works and their recycling coordinator. And we have the Vice President of Paynes, our trash and recycling haulers here in Granby. So that's going to be a really interesting program. What's in, what's out. It's a recycling refresher. But the cool thing is that the Department of Public Works is going to offer a $25 gift certificate to the Granby transfer station. So you could be a lucky winner and come away with a gift certificate. So that might be a nice way to start off the year. And just other programs that are coming. We've got a nature wildlife photographer coming next Thursday. Oh my gosh, Norman Rockwell's evolution as an artist. We have a wonderful art educator that's going to speak about that. Sleep and true circadian health. And then, oh, Grounded Good Wife. If you haven't seen anything from Grounded Good Wife, this is your chance. They're going to come do a program on Saturday afternoon, January 30th. So lots there. It's all on the library's website. It's also in our e-newsletters. If you don't get the newsletter, you can register for one, again, on the website. So thank you for letting me do all these plugs here and give all this housekeeping out of the way. Granby Agricultural Commission, one of the co-sponsors of the Granby Grows series. They are helping us bring the local farm experts to you. So stay tuned and keep your eyes open for future programs. We're bringing local farm, garden professionals, speaking about topics, agricultural topics, environmental topics, and the programs are going to be continuing to run because they've been really popular. So we're going to keep adding them to our program calendar. So now thank you for letting me talk. Now for the good stuff. If you folks love freshly baked bread and you need a time-saving method to enjoy making it at home, you're in for a treat. Bread baking is easy. According to Nancy, it's really easy. She's got a 4-ingredient, no fuss, no knead recipe. Mix in the ingredients, cover, bake, and voila, you've got your bread. I think it's a thing of beauty. Just a heads up, the ingredients list, the baking instructions, and other tips from Nancy will be forwarded to you very soon. And if you've got any feedback for her, or you want to share pictures of your bread successes, she would love to have them. Make sure you visit Lyric Hill Farm. It's let me see, I want to get this right. Lyric Hill, it's so easy. lyrichillfarm.com. So LYRICHILLFARM.com. And you can go to their website. You can use their contact us tab and share all kinds of great information with Nancy. So she knows what's what, and she'll be able to give you excellent feedback. Okay, so by now everybody should be settled and ready to roll. I thank you all for staying muted. And again, if you want to share your video with us, that's fine. But it will be on the recording, and we will be posting this recording to the Granby Public Library YouTube channel. Not immediately, but usually it's up there within a few days. Okay, so whew, now you get to hear Nancy Butler. Welcome to Granby Public Library and Granby Ag Commission's Making Peasant Bread.
Well, thank you for having me.
Holly,
Hi,
I just have
everybody. Oh, there's a question?
We must.
Yes, can she turn her Nancy sideways? Can
I'm
she
sideways?
turn her camera
Say that again, Jody.
sideways?
I'm sideways?
She's sideways on you.
Okay, so
Anybody else see that?
Joni, I've got her straight up, so I'm
Okay.
gonna let you mess with your controls, and then hopefully it will. Yeah, the rest of us are.
Someone else is saying not sideways here, straight up. She's fine. Okay.
Yeah, so we're good.
I know I'm a little crooked, but.
So yeah, we're gonna let you roll with that, and I know we have another person who's having horrible time here trying to get herself admitted, but I'm going to sign off. I'm going to get quiet. I'm going to let Nancy start talking, and I'm going to start working behind the scenes here a little bit, but I'll be here. You guys can chat away, and I'll try to monitor that while I'm being quiet. Okay. Nancy, go right ahead.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is a fun way of baking bread that's easy and not intimidating. And if you have a kid handy, you could even turn it over to them. 4 ingredients, 4 steps, no fuss, no mess, and you get a perfect peasant loaf every time. Holly was gracious enough to call it peasant bread. The New York Times calls it no-knead bread. Around here, I call it slacker bread because it's really not a whole lot of effort. So let's get started. The first thing that you'll need, and I'd like to point out that this is a recipe that is made with King Arthur all-purpose flour. It is not a gluten-free recipe. I don't really understand the chemistry behind gluten-free bread baking, but King Arthur flour does have some gluten-free bread flour, and I would direct you to their website with any kind of questions on gluten-free bread baking because they're way more versed than I am. When I first started baking bread many years ago as a kid, it took a really long time. The bread would have to be, you'd have to proof the yeast, and then you'd have to do multiple stages of rising and then baking, and 5 hours later you had a loaf of bread. And for me, the daunting part was 5 hours worth of work was just gone in 5 minutes after the loaf came out of the oven. So this is an old method that has been revived. It was revived by a gentleman named Jim Leahy of Sullivan Street Bakery back about 10-15 years ago. It's a real simple method, and part of the reason why it works is that the bread is covered in an oven-proof container, and it is baked with a cover on, so the bread actually gets steamed in the process, almost like a commercial bakery. So you get a lovely, lovely, crusty, crunchy exterior, and I'll show you the finished product in a minute. The covered dish, for you folks who are really into the food science behind it, creates something called a Maillard reaction, which essentially is the caramelization of the caramelization of the grains in the bread, and it makes that nice brown crusty exterior. So let's get started. I've measured out 3 cups of all-purpose flour. I use King Arthur, just have it. I'm gonna dump it here in my handy dandy wood bowl. This is all part of the mixing. And then the next ingredient I'm going to use is, I don't know if you can see this, it's an all-purpose instant dry yeast. I use Fleischmann's just because I bought 2 pounds of it during the pandemic when we were all in shutdown, and I felt like I needed to keep my family eating in quiet. And we're gonna take a teaspoon of the dry yeast, just sprinkle that in. And a teaspoon, this is a coarse kosher salt. I prefer using kosher salt because it is a little less salty. So this is what I use. If you're using an iodized table salt, use a little bit less because it tends to be a little bit saltier. So maybe about 1/2 or 3/4 of a teaspoon, depending on your preference. And now here's the really, really hard part. You could use a spoon if you want. Whoops. But I prefer to just get my hand in there and just seriously just mix it all together with your fingers. There you go. Got some lumps in there. And then I'm going to take 1.5 cups of lukewarm water and just add it to my flour, salt, and yeast mixture. So here we go. We've just got and I'm just getting my hands right in there. This is going to be a much stickier and softer dough than what many bread bakers are accustomed to using or seeing. And basically just bringing it all together with your fingers. Easy, easy. Get some of the dough at the bottom. Sometimes weather will affect how much or how little water you use. If you find that your dough is a little too sticky to handle, just add a little bit more flour. And likewise, if it's not coming together, then you just add a little bit more water. So in my case, I think I'm going to need a little bit more flour because it's really sticking to the side of the bowl. Just a little bit on my hands, not much. And you really can't wreck this recipe. Just add it maybe a tablespoon at a time until it all kind of comes together. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just really trying to make sure that it comes off of my fingers. You can see not so much. So I'm going to take a little bit of flour and I am going to rub it off my fingers. Hope everybody's still with me. And it still feels a little sticky. So I'm going to add a little bit more flour to the mixture. And it's okay if there's still some flour in the bowl. Remember, this is a peasant bread, so it is really forgiving, and it's If you've ever made bread, it doesn't have to be smooth or kneaded. So here you go. That's what you've got, this kind of ugly duckling dough that I am going to now take some plastic wrap and cover it. You can oil it if you want. I don't. I feel like it comes off just as well without oiling the paper. And you can even do this tonight after you're done watching. I'm going to cover it with my Joy Newton towel, who's a Granby artist. And off it goes to sit overnight. And in the morning, I will take it out and bake it. So this was some dough that I made this morning for the purpose, the magic of video. And you can kind of see it's a very spongy, gooey looking mixture. This is where I like to use a dough scraper. A wooden dough scraper really does the job of releasing it from not only the cellophane plastic wrap, excuse me, but also from the bowl. So I'm not sure if you can really, I'm sorry about the lighting, but it's very spongy and the dough will be very stringy.
Nancy, it's Holly here, giving a quick interrupt. I'm not sure if this is a burning question or not, but we've had a couple of questions, and I thought we could answer them really quickly. Someone asked about the whether or not we were going to use a stand mixer and a bread dough hook, and
nope, there's no kneading whatsoever. You're not going to knead it at all. You basically measure, mix, let it sit, and after this, we're going to bake it. So if you don't have, I'm sorry, Holly, is there another question?
Well, there's a couple of them, but
keep going.
and I'm just going to throw them at you because you're good at this. You're good at with the balls up in the air and the juggling. So the rapid rise yeast, we had a question about whether or not that was the same as instant dry yeast.
It is not.
Right.
But I don't think it will make a big difference in your ultimate in your end product. So this is a little bit sticky to handle. There are two ways of handling a dough that is kind of sticky, and you can see it's still really soft. It's not forming any kind of shape. It sort of reminds me of glop. So what you can do, there are two ways to handle a very sticky dough like this. One is to get your hands wet, and believe it or not, it's wet. The wetness of your hands will combat the stickiness of the dough. Or for me, I just like to go to just a little bit of flour, and as long as you don't overwork the dough so it has a huge stiff structure, you can see it's really, if I put it down, it's going to lose its shape. Now this is where the magic happens, and this is probably the most important step of the whole process, and you can do this with just about any bread recipe. It will pay off big dividends. I have been heating at 500 degrees. I'm gonna try not to burn myself. A cast iron baker, and it has a lid. So the important thing about this recipe is that you want to bake your bread in something that's covered. It's going to be a steam, it's going to act like a little steam oven. So now I'm going to basically form my bread in a ball, and without burning myself, I'm just gonna plop it in the pan. And it's a little misshapen. And then it gets covered. So make sure that whatever pan you use and it is not greased, you're gonna pop it back in the oven covered for 30 minutes at 450. So being covered is very important. After 30 minutes, you're gonna uncover the bread and let it bake for another 15 minutes. And after 45 minutes, you should have a very nice crusty boule. Oh, there's the cat. He's making his debut. You can double the recipe. I like to make it in small batches just so it gets eaten fresh, and then the next day you can start off. And I'm gonna, hopefully you can hear what it sounds like. It's very, very crusty. Sorry, my knife is a little bit dull.
We can hear it, Nancy. It sounds wonderful. I wish this was smell-o-vision.
And you've got a nice texture. Depending on, it usually is a little bit more open than this, but you get a pretty nice crumb. And that's all a result of that nice steam oven effect from baking it like that. Now, there are a couple of things to consider if you are not going to use 100% wheat flour. So if you're going to add some whole grains to your bread, like oat flour or rye flour or pumpernickel flour or whole wheat flour, add them in initially in small quantities, but you may have to change the temperature that you're baking your bread at, because whole grain breads tend to require a longer baking time at a lower temperature. So if you're just starting out with a all-purpose flour like I do, every single time, 450, half hour of baking covered. Make sure your vessel is oven proof. And will work at those higher temperatures. Make sure you have some really insulated pot holders and mitts, because it really gets hot to navigate. I used to actually take before I had a Dutch oven that I could put in the oven, I used a couple of Pyrex baking dishes. King Arthur flour does have a bread cloche that works beautifully for it, but it is an expensive purchase. It's kind of has a flatter base with a domed lid, but you can be creative. So as long as it's covered, you'll get that nice crusty crust.
So Nancy, it's Holly again with a burning
Yes.
question.
Yes.
Because you've just given us a great explanation, but we did have someone ask, what do we do if we don't have a Dutch oven?
So I had used, an oven before I had the Dutch oven that I just threw in the oven. I used a Pyrex pie plate and domed it over a baking dish that was oven proof. And as long as you have a good seal, you should be fine. It doesn't have to be fancy. You can improvise, but you absolutely have to make sure that it is safe in a hot oven at 450 and that you don't have any of that steam escaping, because that steam is what's going to give it that nice, crusty, crunchy exterior.
So Nancy, another question for you. Thank you. That was a great explanation. I read recently that using the all-purpose flour is what helps make a better crust on peasant breads. And I see that we've got some questions here from our audience.
Okay.
One is, can we add sourdough flavoring? And the other one is, can we add oatmeal?
Yeah, you can. I would say start small. Start with smaller quantities to see how it reacts in your oven, in your situation. So I'm glad you brought that up, because there is a really wonderful book if you decide to explore peasant breads to their fullest. This is, I'm sorry, it's probably backwards. It's a book by a gentleman named Ken Forkish. And it is called, if you can't see it, Flour, Water, Salt, and Yeast. And it's all about making a delicious bread with just 4 ingredients. And when I was growing up, you had to put sugar in it, and you had to, make sure that the temperature was exactly right to not kill the yeast. And this takes it to a new level. So it's really worth a read. And I don't know if the Granby Public Library has it, but it really is a lovely book on all kinds of artisan breads that that even if you just use 1 or 2 recipes from the book, it's certainly a worthwhile buy, even as a coffee table book if you never ever bake it.
So Nancy,
go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm bopping in here again. Flour, water, salt, and yeast is available in a number of libraries within our consortium. Granby Public Library doesn't have it in the collection, but it's in our consortium, so we can always get it for you. And just additionally, the library has artisan bread in 5 minutes a day. I'm just turning around and looking at what I've got on my back counter here. The Bread Bible, My Bread, America's Bestseller Bread, and Confessions of a French Baker Bread.
Right.
So we've got a half dozen books here that are specifically bread, but we can also get the other one too for you.
I have a lot of bread books in my library, and this one really seems to just make it simple. Someone asked a question about how much yeast. So it's 3 cups of flour, and Holly will be sending this out. 3 cups of flour, a teaspoon of yeast, a teaspoon of salt, and a 1.5 cups of water. And remember that you may need to add a little more flour to make it not so sticky, or you may need to add a little bit more water to get it to come together. That's perfectly okay, because it changes from moment to moment and day to day as the weather changes. So the whole point of this particular loaf is to have something that is fast and easy. It makes a wonderful, wonderful French toast. We use it, we toast it, and in the summer I'll make bruschetta from the garden with the tomatoes and basil. Sorry, the cat's meowing in the background, and some fresh chev, and it's just fabulous. So it lends itself really, really well to a lot of different applications, even as a sandwich bread, or hot out of the oven with some butter on it, or dipped in olive oil, seasoned olive oil. It's really, really quite good. But the whole point of this particular type of bread is that it's just so simple and you can do it. I saw a question that was coming and it just went by too quickly. So
how about, here's another question for you. Would it be good to let the bread rise in a cold oven? And or how warm does your house have to be overnight? And maybe you could elaborate a little bit more about that whole temperature issue with rising.
That is absolutely a fabulous question. So I have not, unless it's really, really cold, unless you keep your house around 50 degrees, room temperature is fine. If I am trying to get it to, let's say I haven't really planned it out, the best way to do this particular recipe is to do just like I did and let it sit overnight. And then in the morning, you turn on the oven, you heat up your Dutch oven or whatever vessel you're cooking it in and bake it first thing. Sometimes I'm not that prepared and I'm like, oh, it's halfway through the day and I want bread for dinner. You can speed the process along by putting it, so turn the oven on to like 150, 200, leave it for about 20 minutes, turn it off, and then put your bread in there it kind of speeds up that sponge, the creation of the sponge, that reaction a little bit more. But what I will tell you is the longer you leave it, the more complex the flavor of the bread is. So the breads that are baked after a few hours, maybe just rising in the oven, I see someone said, can you let it sit overnight? But I only saw part of that question. Holly, I hope you saw.
Yeah, we've got a few more that have been coming up.
Okay.
So, oh, I'm sorry here as I'm scanning through. Um, we talked about how warm the house, letting it sit at a cold
Well,
oven.
yeah, I didn't quite answer that one. So as
Okay.
long as it's not really, really cold, room temperature, 65 degrees is fine. If you really, it's so strange that temperature doesn't seem to have a huge effect on it. Now, I wouldn't leave it somewhere
Oh,
freezing,
I'm,
but on the counter overnight is just fine.
I'm sorry. I'm like scrolling through. Everybody's got wonderful. Thank you all for submitting your questions, and I appreciate them. And Nancy, thank you for allowing me to interrupt again. So there were two good questions that came in. Some of them have to do with the Dutch ovens,
Mhm.
such as if the Dutch oven says that it can only go to a 400-degree Fahrenheit maximum temperature, would you just cook the bread longer? And do
No.
we know what internal temp for the bread is actually needed?
I don't. I see it more as a visual. When the crust is brown, then I know it's done. So like today, I think there's a little issue with the temperature of my oven. So when I uncovered it, it needed maybe 22 minutes to brown instead of the 15. If your Dutch oven says it is only good to 400, do not cook it at 450. The trick of this particular type of bread, not to say that you can't make a bread at 400, but that's not this one. The trick of this bread is high temperature, covered so it can steam and get that crust. Those are the my husband is now just walking around. He just spread Nutella on the piece of bread I just sliced. So that's the hardest part of this bread, is keeping people from eating it. So make sure you follow the manufacturer's instruction on your vessel.
So, thank you, Nancy. And could you tell us what quart size your Dutch oven is? Because someone was wondering if a 5-quart Dutch oven would be appropriate for this recipe.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely fine for the single, for the 3-cup loaf. Many times I will double it and make a 6-cup loaf, and most of the time in baking, doubling a recipe is not such a smart move, but this seems to work just fine. I've doubled it, where I've done 6 cups of flour, two teaspoons of yeast, and 2 teaspoons of salt, and it comes out just fine. But you can play with it. It's really the thing that I really want to impart to everybody is it's a pretty forgiving recipe. The big thing to take home is the process of how you bake it. So that hot oven, heat up that pot, make sure you put it in and don't get burned in the process, and then cover it and let it cook at that hot temperature. That simulates a lot of the type of environment that commercial bakeries have in their ovens. Is it
Yeah,
possible to overproof it?
yeah.
That's a great question. No. The funny thing about this recipe is the longer it sits, it tends to just develop a more complex flavor. So I had the dough that I use, that I just put in the Dutch oven right now, I made last night. So it's been sitting there for 24 hours. Because it's slacker bread, so I was slacking. I didn't make two recipes. I doubled the recipe. I baked half this morning and I let the other half sit. So it will be absolutely fine, as long as when you go to put it together, you see that structure. It will be just fine.
So
And
Nancy, that answers the question. Chandler, does that answer your question? Because we had some earlier questions too about whether or not people could let it, another 12 hours.
Someone just popped in with a question of how long to preheat the oven. Put your vessel in the oven. So what I do with mine is I will pop the temperature up to 500, maybe for 25 minutes to a half hour beforehand. It doesn't have to be exact. I mean, what you just don't want to do is put it in a cold Dutch oven or a cold vessel and then put that cold vessel in the oven. You want to have it almost sizzle when you put it in the Dutch oven. That starts that process of that Maillard reaction where everything is starting to crust over and caramelize the sugars and the amino acids in the grains. And you really only get that when you're putting it in a hot vessel in a hot oven. So I'm sure it varies by oven and by what vessel you're using, whether you're using Pyrex or clay. I'm using cast iron, takes a little longer to get it heated up. So anywhere between, 15 minutes at the minimum. If you want to put it in for a half hour, if you got the time, great. Sometimes you just don't have that much time in the morning, and 15 minutes would be absolutely fine. You just don't want to put it in a cold vessel.
All right, that sounds wonderful. Thank you for that explanation.
Welcome.
Do we have any more questions? And I know everybody's being really good about submitting them via chat, and we've been scrolling through a lot of them here. If anybody wasn't able to use the chat feature and they'd like to unmute and ask a direct question. Oh, hold on, we just got another one
Repeat the
coming
info
in.
about, I'm only seeing 2 lines of every
So
the question, so maybe you can help me out here, Holly.
would you please repeat the info about the yeast? What kind of yeast? Maybe a little more about that.
Yep, so let's see if I can, I don't know if you can see it. So I like Fleischmann's. It's just, there's Red Star. It's just an instant dry yeast. It's backwards. I know everybody's gonna kind of put their phone or their screens in front of a mirror.
No,
but
we're good. We're good.
Okay, it's an active dry yeast. There's also, I believe, a Red Star brand. I'm not sure what else. I buy it in 2-pound increments, put it in a canning jar, share it with my friends, and leave it in the fridge. It just means that I always have yeast on hand for baking. And this has become my go-to recipe if I really need something, if I'm going somewhere and I need something that's a little bit of a wow I make a similar bread. I'm sorry. I missed that. Can you see that, Holly? Hello?
I'm here. I'm sorry, I muted myself, but yep, I'm here.
There's just a question that came. I'm not seeing the whole questions as they're coming in. I'm only seeing like one line.
Well, so you kind of heard, I think you were talking about the yeast, the kinds of yeast, and someone was asking again about Red Star active dry yeast, and yes, that's okay. So yep. Nancy, this is coming from Catherine, and she said that she makes a similar bread, and she uses parchment paper. Oh, she said that earlier too. She uses parchment paper to get the dough in and the cooked bread out more easily. Do you ever use parchment paper when you make your bread in your Dutch oven?
I don't. I find that it comes out, but it might just be a function of the oven, the Dutch oven that I have. Nothing ever sticks. Sometimes at those really high temperatures, I find the parchment paper can get very brittle. So, I mean, it's an excellent suggestion. I haven't done it. I've never had an issue with it sticking, and with this, they just seem to pop right out. But whatever works. I mean, this is not an exact science. I think it's the take home is use the techniques that work for you and are comfortable for you. I'm sure if I got burned taking the bread out of the oven, I might start using a parchment paper sling. So, but again, depending on the vessel that you have, that's a fine compromise if it works. Absolutely.
All right. Is there anybody else that has another question?
Welcome. My says,
oh,
go
here
ahead.
we go.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. Somebody's live and in person. Go right ahead.
Hi, this is Donna Snyder. I have a question.
Yes.
Does this bread lend itself if you wanted to have a crust with poppy seeds or sesame seeds or some other type of seeds in it?
Absolutely. You definitely could do that. You're going to get a whole bunch of crackling, so they may roll off. I would maybe just, put a little wash on it first. I haven't done that just because the texture of it is kind of, it's not a smooth texture like you would get on some other breads. It's very crackly. So, it experiment with it. I mean, what I would do is I'd start out with the basic, and the sky's the limit. Use it as, your canvas. But I think that would absolutely be fine.
And would that
Maybe like-
also,
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Donna.
could you do fresh herbs in with the 4 ingredients?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is just your springboard for starting out. You can start to change it, if you want to put a little bit of whole wheat flour in, or if you like a little bit of oat, or you want to jazz it up with rosemary and olives. The sky's the limit. This is just, I was just hoping with this recipe that folks who are typically intimidated by making bread would venture out to like, oh, I can't bake anything with yeast. Yeah, you can. It's really not that tough. I have a friend who, when I handed her the recipe, she's just not she's not a cook, she's not a baker. I handed her the recipe and I told her to have her 13-year-old daughter bake. And I'm like, here's a recipe for your daughter to bake bread. And she's made it hundreds of times now, and it's come out great every single time. So they're the purists who will never ever change it and make it just with those 4 ingredients. And there are the folks who like to walk on the wild side and have a little bit more spice to it. Go for it. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Do it. Try it. And it'll smell good coming out of the oven too if you put herbs in it.
How's everybody else doing? Thank you for that great answer. And Donna, thank you for that great question. That was wonderful. I don't know if there's any other questions, but I wanted to, and I'm sorry if you covered this before and I missed it, but I just wanted to reiterate that what really strikes me about Nancy's peasant bread recipe is that if you're unfamiliar with bread making to begin with, I mean, this is kind of a little bit different. Your dough is sticky. You're not kneading your dough. You're putting it in a preheated, very hot cooking vessel. So those are techniques that are a little bit different from some of your standard bread making recipes. So hopefully the recipe that you've all been emailed is very clear. But if it's not, it also has Lyric Hill Farms website, so you can reach out to Nancy and ask her questions and give her some more feedback.
Welcome. Can this recipe be used to make and then
Dinner rolls.
I've thought of doing that's a great question. And how I would do it is I was thinking that I would probably take 2 cast iron muffin tins and put fill them maybe by half and do it that way and see if that worked. I have never done it, but that's my guess of how to do it. If you try and shape them into little balls and put them in your Dutch oven, what happens is it's such a soft dough that it will not hold a particular shape. It's just going to kind of go into the shape of the Dutch oven that you're making it in. Could you bake it uncovered with?
Could you bake it uncovered with a pan of water on the bottom shelf?
Yes, that is a technique, but the whole point of this particular one is to make it as easy as possible, so you're not fussing with anything else. There definitely is a technique of making French bread and crusty breads where you do put a pan of hot water in the bottom, or you put some wet towels in the bottom. But this is just pure ease of just put it in a covered oven, like really no fuss. I mean, easy peasy lemon squeezy kind of thing. But absolutely, that is a technique that is used all the time to create a steamed oven, which is what gives you that crustiness on your bread.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. That's great.
And I suspect that, you know, in the book, the Ken Forkish book, there are some recipes that use that technique. But this is just for simplicity, to kind of get people started in making a simple but tasty bread. Nothing makes you want to do something more than having success on your first time out. So, you know, if you start with this then, and you want to get more complicated and make a sourdough starter, or, you know, make croissants, go for it. But, you know, hopefully this is that stepping stone to easy, everyday bread that you can make without, you know, really fussing. I'll mix it, like I said, I will mix it up at night before I go to bed, cover it, bake it in the morning. And then there's fresh bread for sandwiches in the morning.
Yeah. Nancy, you may have covered this earlier too, but I've always, I don't always remember this, but when it backfires on me, is when I do. Fresh ingredients. If you've opened up your bag of flour and you don't really keep it in an airtight container somewhere, or if your yeast has expired. I know I was reading
Right.
through some of the comments. Some of the comments are private, some of them are to everyone. But I know that if you ever have bread failure and you get a little nervous about it, sometimes it's just starting with the right ingredients and making sure that they're fresh, or they at least haven't gone stale or bad. So
Correct. That's a great point. There is an expiration date on the yeast. Make sure you follow it. As far as flour trick, I learned a long time ago, because sometimes, you know, you do, if you have it sitting around for a long time, there are different critters that lay their eggs in the grains. And bay leaf or two, a dried bay leaf or two in your flour will help keep the buggies at bay. And always keep it in a sealed, airtight container. So if they are there, they don't escape into your house, because we, you know, I buy flour in 25-pound bags, and I live in the house of testosterone. So everybody's eating a lot of bread all the time. You know, my 3-cup, my 3-cup of flour bread will be like one person's sandwich most of the time. So we go through a lot of flour, but I also make sure that it's in a sealed plastic container, and that I put a bay leaf in it to keep any critters from hatching out in the flour.
Nancy, I love that bay leaf tip. I had not heard that before, so thank you. Meanwhile, we have another question.
Sure.
So Ashley was mentioning that she freezes her flour after she breaks down a 25-pound bag. She was wondering if that's okay.
Yep.
And then she also asked, she keeps her active dry yeast in a baggie in the fridge. Is that okay, or should it be in a
Perfect.
mason jar in the fridge?
Nah, it's whatever works for you, whatever kind of space that you have. I don't keep the flour in the freezer because I've got frozen veggies in there. But that's a great idea. It's a great method, and would keep, you know, any kind of insect pests that might be living in the flour at bay because it's cold. So that's a wonderful suggestion. Thank you for that. And yeah, in a bag, I would just make sure that you get as much of the air out as you can.
And then probably bring it to room temperature before you start working with it, or does it matter?
No, you know, in this particular recipe, probably not, because it's sitting overnight. So
Okay.
that would be less of an issue. But I've never had where I've had to bring the yeast up to room temperature, or I haven't thought about it, and haven't had, knock wood, bread failure. Now watch, there's a bread failure.
Oh, no.
I'm gonna just take a peek
Now.
and see if it's time to uncover, because what I did not do was I did not set the timer on. Oh, I wish you guys could smell this.
We wish we could smell it too.
Oh, so it's not quite ready to get uncovered, but it just makes such a nice, it's just so easy. Honestly, I almost feel bad sometimes, well, not too bad, slicing into it, because it's friends of mine know it as slacker bread, because that's what I call it, because I feel like after years of spending a lot of time with a lot of effort, and especially if anybody's ever made sourdough bread and there's a lot of steps, this just seems ridiculously easy. And it is not my recipe. It was originally written by Jim Leahy of Sullivan Bakery in New York City. He wrote this recipe for the New York Times. It's been tweaked many, 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 many times. If you're looking for some really tried and true wonderful recipes, the New York Times is really a go-to spot for any kind of recipes. You're welcome. Thanks, Jane, for joining. And I believe this might even be under no-knead bread. That's, I believe, what the category is. And there might be a little bit of a difference in what they might use a little less yeast than I do. I think it's like maybe 3/4 of a tablespoon, of a teaspoon, excuse me. I like to make things nice and simple, so I remember, and it comes out just fine.
Okay, well, we are getting close to the end of our hour, and I don't see any more questions coming in, but I do see a lot of thank yous for Nancy. I want to extend my appreciation too. We wouldn't have had such a great program without her. She's very knowledgeable and very friendly, and always willing to share her knowledge with the community. So this was great. And we're getting all kinds of comments. Everyone's inspired. Thank you all.
Well, now everybody can go and bake some bread.
I'm going to run home tonight.
Mix it up tonight and bake it in the morning and let me know how it comes out.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for your patience, for asking all these great questions. I hope we got to your questions, but if we didn't, please go to lyrichillfarm.com and reach out to Nancy that way, or stop by well, you can't really stop by the library to come inside, but you can come and get your curbside pickups. So give us a call or go online and place requests for any books, any cookbooks. We have shelves and shelves and shelves of cookbooks at the library, and we can get others books from other libraries too. So I thank you all for coming.